Já, komið þið sæl. Gunnlaugur Snær Ólafsson heiti ég, verið velkomin til okkar. Ég fengi hér góðan gest, en hann heiti Elliott og einn af stofnendum Samtaka Skattgreiðenda í Bretlandi, Taxpayers Alliance, TPA, en einnig formaður viðskiptasambands fyrir Bretland, eða Business for Britain. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you.
And of course, I hope you like your stay in Iceland so far. And I think we'll just jump right to it, as we are trying to keep it short and neat.
Yes.
So the Taxpayers Alliance, what is that?
The Taxpayers Alliance is Britain's grassroots campaign for taxpayers. So we're the people who actually represent taxpayers in the UK and make the case for lower taxation and less government spending, or we particularly campaign against government waste. So we hate it when we see any of our taxpayers' money being wasted by the government, be it national government, local government, or indeed the EU.
Very interesting. And in that sense, you have co-authored a book called The Great European Ripoff. And I would like to ask, when you write such a book, probably you start by doing some research.
Yes.
Are there some particular issues that you remember that you discovered that you didn't know before?
I think what really struck me was actually the pay and perks of people who work for the European institutions. And let's not forget that these institutions are very distant to people, because it's not like their local town hall or even the national government. These institutions based in Brussels. And what really struck me was how people who work for the European Commission, for example, are entitled to taxation at 15%. Now, there are lots of British taxpayers who pay tax at, between 40 and 50%, who love to have 15% taxation. So that really struck me how absurd that was. Here you have a very unaccountable, unelected class of politicians and bureaucrats who have so low tax rates. That seemed really unfair to me.
I see. And one of the things that here in Iceland has been very much in the debate is that the yes side has presented this idea that if we join the EU, we have so much to gain because we get access to all these funds.
Yes.
That are in the hands of the EU. What would your response be to that?
I mean, one of the key things is, first of all, don't believe everything said by the EU. I'm constantly reminded of the fact that they spend, I think it's 2.4 billion euros a year, and that's billion euros, I'm not exaggerating, a year, on groups who support the EU or propaganda for the EU. So I don't believe their figures for one moment. Certainly from a UK point of view, we're very much a net contributor to the EU. So for every £2 we put into the EU, we only get £1 back. And I think so long as we have countries in the EU who are, pretty bad spenders, countries like, Greece and Portugal and what have you, and Spain, I'm not sure Britain will get any money back of great significance. And I think that if Iceland were to make the mistake of entering the EU, you'd be one of these countries who will be net contributors rather than net beneficiaries.
And certainly, and that might connect to your book a bit, getting out of the funds, of course, means that you're also paying into the funds.
Yes.
And of course, nobody will get the same amount out of it as they pay in, because there's some staff and so on. Do you know, is waste a big problem in the EU? And is waste a particular problem when it comes to managing these funds and policies of the EU?
Yeah. Waste is a huge problem because, the EU is so remote to the lives of ordinary people because it's unelected and because it's a long way away. I think that means that a lot of the time the bureaucrats who are running the EU feel are very out of touch, and they lose sight of the fact that what they're spending is actually taxpayers' money, that people actually went out to work, worked extremely hard to pay the taxation, to pay for these things which they're providing. And that that means they're out of touch. It means that some of the things which would be completely absurd for the average person on the street, they think is perfectly normal. So items of waste in the European Parliament, for example. We wanted a research paper at the Taxpayers Alliance looking into the artwork, for example, in the European Parliament, and the literally hundreds of thousands of pounds spent on the statues and the ornaments and the paintings and what have you that adorn the European Parliament. And to the average voter, this is just a complete waste of money. When people work really hard, they don't want their money wasted.
I think we can all agree on that, that we don't want our money wasted. If we move on maybe a little bit on, of course you might know very well what goes on in UK politics,
yes.
Maybe more than I will and most Icelanders. How is the debate faring in the UK on the EU issue?
Well, it was a really interesting point now. At the beginning of this year, in January 2013, David Cameron made quite an important speech where he said that he wanted to have an in-out referendum on Britain's EU membership by the end of 2017 to give people a say, because we haven't had a say on this issue since 1975. Now, before that happens, he said he's going to have a renegotiation. He wants to sit down with the other member states and actually work out not just a better deal for the UK, but a better deal for everybody, because in a sense, Europe's at a crossroads. The Eurozone clearly isn't working at the moment. We still have got a Eurozone crisis going on, and it needs to have some form of fiscal union and some form of banking union to actually stand a chance of working. Now, if the Eurozone is integrating, Britain doesn't want the euro, so that means the rights of non-euro countries need to be protected. And that opens up an opportunity for a conversation about what Europe should look like in the future. And I think that what David Cameron expressed was that at the heart of that relationship should be the single market, and in particular access to the single market. And that should be that spine of trade across the EU, I think, is a good thing which we could all support. But I think some of the other aspects of EU membership are things which we never thought we were going to get into, things like justice and home affairs, the common foreign policy, even things like the common agricultural policy now seem very anachronistic to be an EU competence. So I think we need to have a big debate about all of those things. Keep trade as being central to the EU, but perhaps make the other things much more of an opt-in thing for the future.
So to me, and probably for a lot of the Icelanders, you're describing the EEA agreement, which Iceland and Norway are a part of, and Liechtenstein. Not very big countries, but of course we have the EEA agreement, which is the single market policies, without the rest of the political aspect of the EU. Is that a situation where you see the UK moving towards?
There's certainly lots of people, when I speak to them about the EU, they say when we voted to stay in the EEC, as it then was, in 1975, we thought it was all about trade. We voted yes because we wanted to be able to trade with our European partners. We didn't vote for European government. We didn't vote for a common foreign policy. We didn't vote for heavy regulations on businesses. We just voted for trade. And I think were the Prime Minister to be able to come back with an agreement where we said we're going to be able to trade with other countries, lots of people will be very happy with that. And I can actually see the EU moving towards a situation where you have almost three tiers. You have the hardcore Eurozone, which is heavily centralised with almost a common government and common tax and spend policies. Britain doesn't want to be part of that. Then you have another tier which is a non-Eurozone, but that includes lots of cooperation on things like foreign policy and home affairs policy. And again, Britain is very uncomfortable about that. But you can imagine a third tier of countries, which will perhaps include Iceland and Norway and Switzerland and perhaps Turkey as well, who are just saying, look, we want to be able to trade with countries within the EU. And that's the sort of position which I can see Britain moving towards as we go forward in our agreement.
Thank you very much for interesting conversation.
Thank you.
And thank you for coming. Matthew Elliott, and you're welcome back to Iceland at any time. I hope you'll visit us again.
I hope so too.